Clara, just 9 years old, with fierce eyes and something far greater than her years burning inside her, dashed onto the auction floor, walking straight toward the trembling mare, one arm outstretched, daring the world to believe she could do it. What happened next would change both their lives forever. Wishing you a lucky day, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories. The winter sun hung low over Red Creek, a pale disk barely breaking through a quilt of frost-hazed clouds. Main Street was quiet except for the lazy sway of the hardware store sign in the wind and the scent of coffee drifting from the diner. Beyond the last row of weather-worn buildings, the county fairgrounds were buzzing. Trucks and trailers lined the gravel lot, breath from both animals and men turning into vapor in the sharp, cold air. Inside Barn C, the hum of voices was wrapped in the smell of hay, manure, and the metallic tang of the frost. The bleachers were packed ranchers in worn canvas coats, older cowhands with boots dusted from long miles, and townsfolk curious to watch the Saturday sale. Over it all rose the rhythmic patter of Billy McCrae, the auctioneer, his voice a rolling tide coaxing bids up with each wave. In the second row sat Thomas Whitfield, 37 years old, tall and lean from years of ranch work, with steel-gray eyes and a face lined by both sun and strain. His dark brown hair, cut short at home, showed early threads of gray. A man of few words and steady hands, Thomas had carried more than his share of loss wildfire taking their grazing land, debts stacking higher each season, and the quiet ache of losing his wife to illness 3 years before. Beside him sat his daughter, Clara, bundled in an oversized army green parka that had once been her mother's. Clara was 9, with a heart-shaped face sprinkled with freckles and hazel green eyes that held an intensity beyond her years. Her light chestnut brown hair escaped its ponytail in stubborn wisps, and her small frame seemed almost swallowed by the coat. Since her mother's passing, the only time Thomas saw pure light in her eyes was when she was around horses. Today, he had reminded her more than once, "We're here to look, not to buy." The south pasture fence sagged like a tired back, the tractor's belt was fraying, and the bank's letters still waited unopened on the kitchen table. Clara had nodded, but Thomas knew the way hope could hum under a quiet surface. Sheriff Allen Pierce moved along the aisle, boots clicking softly on the wooden boards. At 44, he was broad-shouldered, olive-skinned, with short black hair streaked at the temples and dark brown eyes that scanned a room without seeming to. Years ago, Allen had carried Thomas out from under a collapsed beam after a wildfire flare-up, and the two men had shared a steady, wordless friendship since. He tipped his hat to Clara, and she smiled an open, trusting smile rare these days. "Morning, Whitfields," Allen said, his voice calm but carrying. "Keep your hands still unless you're bidding. McCrae's looking for easy targets today." Thomas gave a short laugh. "She's under orders." Allen's gaze lingered on the girl a moment before he moved toward the back wall, his presence like a quiet guardrail. The sale moved briskly. Lot 28, 29, 30-quarter horses, a gray gelding, a shaggy pony. Prices climbed and fell in Billy's practiced rhythm. Then the gate opened for Lot 42. She stepped in, a Mustang mare, chestnut coat dulled from neglect, ribs faint beneath it, but belly heavy and low. Her mane, darker brown and tangled, lay in uneven ropes along her neck. She moved cautiously, each step swaying the unborn life inside her. Her deep amber-brown eyes scanned the ring, the eyes of one who had learned to measure the intentions of people from a distance. The handler, a young man in a frayed navy jacket, tugged her forward. She stumbled slightly, then gathered herself with a quiet dignity that drew Clara forward in her seat. Billy's voice dipped lower. "Chestnut Mustang mare, about 7 years old, in foal, due in roughly 6 weeks. Strong bone. Sire unknown." From the bleachers came murmurs, vet bills, too much risk, kill buyer list, each phrase a nail in her coffin. No bid cards lifted. Clara's small hand slid into her father's. "Daddy, nobody wants her." Thomas looked at his daughter's face, saw the way her brows knit together, and felt the same ache he'd felt watching his wife tend to a stray dog years ago, whispering that every creature deserved a chance. He opened his mouth to answer, but before he could, a voice near the rail called out to the handler. The man turned to respond, pulling the mare into a halt. In that heartbeat, the gate stood slightly ajar. Clara moved. She slid off the bench, quick and sure-footed, slipping through the narrow gap before Thomas could stand. "Clara!" he began, half rising, but a firm hand touched his arm. Sheriff Pierce, close behind, gave a small shake of his head. "She's all right. Watch her." There was trust in his tone, and a readiness that said if anything went wrong, he'd be there in 2 strides. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some voices urged her back. "Hey, get that kid out," while others murmured encouragement. The mare's ears swiveled toward the small figure approaching, her body tensing, then pausing. Clara kept her eyes on the horse, one hand out, her voice a low hum only the mare could hear. Thomas stood frozen, torn between the instinct to protect and the realization that something deeper was unfolding. The scene pulled at him, Clara's steady approach, the way the mare's head lowered slightly, as if meeting a long-lost language. In that moment, Thomas saw his wife's steadiness in his daughter, the same calm under pressure, the same refusal to turn away from something in need. Billy's voice broke the spell. "Little miss, you can't be in here, it's not safe." Clara didn't look away from the mare. "Sir," she said, her voice carrying clear across the barn, "I think she's trying to come home." The words landed heavy in Thomas's chest. He exhaled, made his choice. Stepping to the rail, he caught Billy's eye. "150, he called. Billy seized the bid. "150 from the gentleman in the second row. Do I hear 175? Silence. A few exchanged looks, some shaking their heads. Going once, going twice. Sold, to the gentleman with the brave little girl. The gavel cracked down. Clara reached the mare's shoulder, her small palm resting against the warm hide. The mare let out a deep breath, the tension in her neck easing. "Your name is Marigold," Clara whispered, as if stating a truth rather than choosing it. The handler glanced at Thomas. "Paperwork's at the desk. She'll need feed and a quiet stall." Sheriff Pierce stepped closer, his gaze steady. "You sure about this?" Thomas let out a breath that was half a laugh. "No, but I'm right." Allen nodded. "If trouble comes over this mare, you call me. There's been talk of horse theft on Highway 12. Thomas gave a short nod, the sheriff's words tucking themselves into the back of his mind. Outside, the cold air hit them, carrying the scent of wood smoke. The light had shifted, sun breaking through the clouds in narrow shafts. They led Marigold toward the side gate, Thomas with the lead rope, Clara close to the mare's shoulder. Behind them, the auctioneer's voice rose again for the next lot, but the sound faded under the steady rhythm of hooves on packed earth. Clara looked up at her father, eyes bright, cheeks pink from the cold. "We're going home, Marigold." Thomas didn't correct her. In her voice, home was not a place, it was a promise. And for the first time in a long while, he felt the weight on his shoulders shift, just enough to let in a little light. The pale winter sun was already dipping low by the time Thomas turned the truck off the county road and onto the gravel lane leading to the Whitfield ranch. The trailer bumped behind them in a slow, steady sway, its load shifting with care. Clara had her seatbelt off despite her father's earlier warning, leaning forward so she could peer through the narrow side window into the trailer. "Almost home," she whispered, as if the sound could carry through the aluminum wall to the chestnut mare inside. The place they called home was humble patchwork fences stitched together with wire, a single red barn with 3 empty stalls, and a white farmhouse that had lost most of its paint to wind and years. Beyond the back pasture, the land rolled toward low, brown hills dotted with winter weeds. Clara had always thought it beautiful in its own quiet way, but today it looked different, like it was waiting for someone new. Thomas backed the trailer toward the barn doors and cut the engine. Clara was out before the vehicle stopped, pulling her knit cap over her ears and jogging toward the ramp. He unlatched the door slowly, speaking low so as not to startle the mare. Marigold stepped down one cautious hoof at a time, nostrils flaring at the scent of hay, earth, and wood smoke. Her chestnut coat caught the last light, rich in tone though dulled in texture, her heavy belly swaying under her. At the barn entrance, a figure stood beside a garden cart stacked high with fresh-cut hay bales and 2 sacks of grain. Mrs. June Callahan, their nearest neighbor, was 62 and built strong from decades of farm work, her silver hair pulled back into a bun, her brown eyes warm but sharp. She wore a thick wool cardigan over a faded floral dress and a heavy apron with straw clinging to the hem. "Figured she'd be hungry," she said, patting the top bale. It's good hay, no dust, no mold, and that feeds the kind that'll put weight on her without upsetting her belly. Clara's face lit with gratitude. Thank you, Mrs. Callahan. Thomas took the cart's handle and wheeled it toward the feed room, but June followed into the barn, her boots crunching over the packed dirt. I remember when your mama helped me pull my old Jersey cow through a rough calving, she told Clara softly. Guess it's my turn to help you with yours. Inside, Thomas led Marigold to the end stall. He clipped the lead to a quick-release knot on the wall ring, then pulled a webbed stall guard across the entrance. Let her settle before you go in, he told Clara. Talk to her from here first. Clara obeyed, resting her arms on the top rail and speaking in that gentle, steady voice she'd used since the auction. Marigold kept one ear trained on her while sniffing the bedding and water bucket. By the time Thomas had stacked the hay in the feed room, the crunch of tires outside signaled another arrival. A battered blue pickup rolled to a stop and Dr. Ruth Sanders stepped out, hoisting her canvas veterinary bag. She was 48, lean and medium height, with auburn hair pulled into a low ponytail and rectangular glasses framing hazel eyes. Years in large animal practice had given her a brisk efficiency, but her tone softened when she spotted Clara. I got your message from the sale barn, Ruth said to Thomas as she approached. Good you called ahead. Let's give her a few minutes to catch her breath before I lay hands on her. She nodded toward the stall. Offer her a little of the old hay to start, not too much. Then I'll check her over. They waited 15 minutes while Marigold nibbled and drank from a bucket of lukewarm water. When her breathing had settled and her posture eased, Ruth ducked under the stall guard. She moved around the mare in a slow half-circle, listening to her heart and lungs, checking gums, running her hands down each leg, then pressing gently along her barrel to feel for the foal. She's underweight, but the foal feels like it's developing normally, Ruth said at last. Still, first pregnancies, especially with her background, carry a higher risk of dystocia. You need to be ready for that. Clara had been holding her breath. I'll take care of her, she blurted. I promise. Ruth studied her for a moment, then reached into her bag and pulled out a notepad. She tore off a sheet and began writing. This is your daily checklist. Feed 3 to 4 small meals. Mix the new hay with the old half and half for the first few days. Add a salt block in the corner. Here's a packet of probiotic powder and a vitamin mineral mix sprinkled on the evening feed for the next 10 days. And, she added, handing Clara a pen, sign here. It's your contract to follow the plan exactly. Clara signed her name with fierce concentration. While Ruth packed her bag, Thomas stepped out to the porch to check the mailbox. The air bit colder now, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. He flipped through the handful of envelopes until his gaze stopped on one bearing the Red Creek Agricultural Bank logo. The paper inside was crisp, the language blunt. Notice of intent to foreclose. Payment in arrears. Deadline, the 15th of next month. He read it twice before folding it flat and slipping it into the inside pocket of his jacket, pressing his hand over it as if to keep it from blowing away. From the barn came the sound of Clara's voice, telling Marigold about the first snowfall she hoped to see, about the foal's first spring in the pasture. Thomas stood for a moment in the dusk, the weight of the letter in his pocket matched only by the weight of his daughter's faith inside the barn. Tonight was not the night to tell her. June helped him stack the last of the hay, brushing straw from her apron. If you run low before the month's out, I'll bring more. We'll sort the bill later, she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Ruth, now at the door, reminded them to watch for any signs of distress, loss of appetite, unusual restlessness, changes in discharge, and to call immediately if they saw anything. I'll be back in a week to recheck her, she said, giving Marigold's shoulder a final pat before climbing into her truck. When the yard was quiet again, Thomas returned to the stall. Marigold stood with one hind leg cocked in comfort, chewing slowly. Clara had eased the stall guard open just enough to step inside and sit on the upturned bucket by the mare's shoulder. She likes it here, she said, leaning against him when he came to stand beside her. Thomas looked at the mare, then at his daughter. Then we'll make sure she stays. He checked the quick-release knot, topped the water bucket, and pulled a light blanket over Marigold's back. Clara reached up to stroke the mare's neck and whispered, "You're safe now." Thomas didn't speak, but in his mind he echoed the words over the letter in his pocket, over the uncertainty ahead, as a promise he meant to keep, one day at a time. The morning after Ruth Sanders' visit arrived crisp and sharp. the kind of Red Creek winter day when frost clung to fence rails like powdered sugar and the pasture shimmered under a pale sun. Inside the barn, Thomas forked a measured flake of hay into Marigold's stall, mindful to keep to the portions Ruth had prescribed. Clara, still in her pajamas but bundled into an oversized red flannel coat, stood at the feed bin, preparing the mare's evening ration early. She carefully measured out the pelleted grain, sprinkled in the probiotic powder Ruth had given her, then sealed the lid tight, her way of ensuring nothing was forgotten. Marigold, the chestnut Mustang quarter-horse cross with a heavy, swaying belly and the faint white star on her forehead, chewed slowly, her warm breath rising in clouds that mingled with the faint smell of hay and clean wood shavings. The mare's ears flicked toward Clara's voice, recognizing the cadence, and her eyes softened in that half-lidded way horses have when they've decided a human is safe. The quiet of the morning was broken by the low, confident growl of a truck engine. Tires crunched over the frozen gravel in the lane, the sound drawing Thomas's gaze toward the road. A dark green Ford F-250 rolled into view, its chrome grille flashing in the weak sunlight. It was the kind of truck that didn't belong on a working ranch, too polished, too deliberate. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Harlan Tate. At 52, he carried a stocky, broad-shouldered frame that spoke of strength but also indulgence. His hands were thick, his cabled forearms visible beneath the cuff of a camel-colored wool coat. A neatly trimmed goatee framed a mouth that smiled without warmth, and his pale blue eyes flicked across the yard like a man appraising a ledger. His jeans were pressed, his boots burnished to a deep shine, and even in the chill there was a faint waft of expensive cologne. "Morning, Whitfield," Harlan called, voice smooth and practiced, as if he'd rehearsed it for county fair speeches. "Heard you came back from the auction with something interesting." Thomas stepped into the barn doorway, wiping his hands on his jeans, his body unconsciously blocking the view of the stalls. "Morning, Tate. What's your business here?" "Word travels fast around here," Harlan replied, his gaze sliding toward the dim interior. "That chestnut mare you bought, Mustang quarter-horse cross and foal, used to be mine. Picked her up from a breeder out west. Didn't think much of her until I checked the registry again last night." He reached into his coat and withdrew a manila envelope, pulling out a printout and holding it like a trump card. "Copper Skylines. On the dam side, she's a great-granddaughter of Red Baron, two-time national cutting champion. That foal she's carrying could be worth a small fortune." At the mention of the stranger's voice, Marigold shifted in her stall, ears pinning briefly. Clara appeared beside her father, one small hand curling around the doorframe. The mare's tail gave a swish, but when Clara softly murmured her name, Marigold's left ear turned toward the girl, the tension in her neck easing. "I'm here to make you an offer," Harlan continued. "Cashier's check from Red Creek Bank, 3 times what you paid at auction. We can do the deal right now." Thomas's jaw flexed. He thought of the bank letter folded in his inside pocket, the one warning him that the ranch could be lost if the past due note wasn't paid by mid-month. And then he looked at Clara. Her eyes were locked on Marigold as if the mare were already part of their family. He slid his thumb over the folded paper in his pocket, then let his hand fall away. "She's not for sale." Harlan's mouth curled slightly, the expression more predator than amused. "Think about it, Whitfield. Pregnant mares can be trouble. Vet bills, complications. I could take that risk off your hands and leave you with a cushion in your account." "I'm not in the habit of selling family," Thomas said, his voice steady. For a heartbeat, something hard flashed in Harlan's eyes. Then he slipped the printout back into the envelope and returned it to his coat. "Suit yourself. But if you change your mind, you know where to find me." He tipped his hat in Clara's direction, the gesture practiced but hollow, and turned toward his truck. The polished boots clicked on the frozen dirt, the sound sharp in the still air. Moments later, the truck's engine roared to life and carried him back down the lane. As the dust settled, Clara darted to Marigold's stall, slipping her fingers through the bars to stroke the mare's neck. Thomas stayed where he was, eyes still on the road. He'd seen that look in Tate's face before, the look of a man who saw animals only in terms of profit and loss. It was late afternoon when another vehicle approached, its sound familiar this time. The county SUV eased into the yard, road dust dulling its paint. Sheriff Alan Pierce climbed out, his tall, broad-shouldered frame wrapped in a service jacket that bore the wear of long days and longer nights. At 44, Alan's dark eyes were sharp beneath the brim of his hat, his manner steady in a way that had settled more than one tense barnyard quarrel. "Afternoon, Thomas. Clara," he greeted, removing his hat and tucking it under his arm. His gaze flicked toward the barn. "Saw Tate's F-250 headed out this way this morning. That about what I think it was?" Thomas didn't hedge. "He came with a cashier's check, wanted Marigold back. I told him no." Alan's mouth tightened. "Doesn't surprise me. He's been on my radar for a while. We've had a string of horse thefts in the last 6 months, all good stock, gone in the night. Tate's name keeps cropping up. Haven't caught him red-handed yet, but I'd bet he's involved." Clara's voice was small but direct. "You think he'd try to steal her?" Alan crouched slightly to meet her eye level. "I think Tate doesn't like losing something he believes is his. And if Marigold's as valuable as those papers say, he might try to get her back by other means. That's why you need to be ready." He straightened, addressing Thomas again. "Lock your gates after dark, get motion lights on the barn. I'd put up a trail camera or two. If you catch a plate number, that's half the battle. And take a full set of ID photos of Marigold, whole body, markings, that star on her forehead, so we've got proof she's yours." Thomas nodded. "We'll make it happen." Alan handed him a business card. "That's my cell. You see or hear anything, even just a strange truck slowing on the road, you call me. I'll also have a patrol swing by at night for the next week." When the sheriff's SUV finally pulled away, the winter light was fading fast. Long shadows stretched over the pasture, the air sharper now, carrying the scent of wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. Thomas checked each latch on the barn twice, his hands lingering on the top rail of Marigold's stall. The mare shifted her weight, the foal turning inside her with a slow, visible roll under her hide. Clara had brought a small curry comb from the tack room and was gently working it down Marigold's neck. "She's safe here," she said quietly, as if to convince both of them. Thomas looked at her, then at the mare, and finally toward the lane where tire tracks still marked the frost. "We'll make sure she stays that way," he said, the words less a reassurance than a promise. The storm struck Red Creek just after nightfall, swallowing the last silver trace of moon behind a wall of black clouds. Wind howled across the Whitfield property, rattling the barn doors and making the old wind vane shriek with every gust. Rain, driven sideways, hissed against the tin roof in an unbroken rush. Thomas had just finished his last check in the barn when he noticed Marigold pacing, her copper-red coat darkened with sweat despite the cold. Her flanks rippled, tail swishing in agitation, and every few steps she paused to lift her head, nostrils flaring. Clara, curled on a hay bale with a book, looked up at the sound of restless hoofbeats. She set the book aside and walked to the stall. "Daddy, she's breathing so fast," she said, worry edging her voice. Thomas laid his hand on the mare's warm shoulder. Her breaths came short and rapid, her eyes wide and distant. The subtle rolling beneath her belly told him the truth he had been both expecting and dreading. The foal was coming, and it would be tonight. He moved quickly. "Clara, get the clean towels from the tack room, the white bucket, and the foaling kit." The girl dashed off, boots thudding on the wooden floor. Thomas pulled on the headlamp from the hook, slung a waterproof tarp across the drafty side of the stall to block the wind, and set a pot of water heating in the feed room. The kit contained bandages, iodine solution, long obstetric gloves, lubricant, and a checklist Ruth Sanders had left them. Phone in hand, Thomas called Ruth. Relief flooded him when she answered, but it was short-lived. A cottonwood had fallen across County Road 8, blocking her route, and the county crew couldn't clear it until daylight. "Thomas, keep her calm," Ruth said over the rain static. "If she's still in early labor, let her walk. When you see the front legs, let her lie down. Give her space, keep the area clean, and pull gently only with each contraction. I'll stay on the line as long as you need me." Clara reappeared with the towels, arms wrapped tight around them. "We can't do this by ourselves," she whispered. Before Thomas could answer, another sound cut through the rain. Tires crunching on wet gravel, headlights swinging across the barn wall. Sheriff Alan Pierce's SUV rolled into the yard. He stepped out into the storm, rain streaming from his hat brim, his uniform jacket dark with water. At 44, his broad-shouldered frame still carried the strength of his youth, but tonight his face was set with focused urgency. "I got word from dispatch," he said, unbuttoning his jacket. "Ruth called me since I was patrolling nearby. Thought you could use another pair of hands." Thomas didn't hesitate. She's close. Ruth's on speaker. Alan hung his jacket on a hook and entered the stall beside Thomas, moving with the calm economy of a man who had been in tense situations before. Clara stood outside the stall guard, passing towels through the opening when asked. At the sound of her voice, Marigold's ears shifted, her breathing slowing for a few moments before the next contraction rippled down her body. Between contractions, Alan's eyes flicked to Thomas. His voice was low enough for only the man to hear. Ever carry something for years, wishing you could change it? Thomas kept his focus on the mare. Plenty of times. There was a fire 15 years back, Alan said. Trailer home on the south side. We got most out, but a little girl was trapped in the back. The heat drove us out before we could reach her. Not a week has gone by I haven't replayed it. Thought I'd buried it. Then your Clara talked to me at the fair last fall, asking about my horse like we'd known each other for years. She's got the same spark that girl had. I'm not going to let history repeat itself. Thunder rolled overhead, deep and slow. Inside the stall, Marigold lowered herself to the straw, legs folding carefully. Thomas and Alan cleared space, shifting bales and tools away. The first glimpse of slick forelegs appeared, white fetlocks glistening in the light. Looks normal presentation, Ruth's voice came from the speaker. 2 legs, soles down, good. Now with each contraction, pull gently down toward her hocks. Alan steadied Marigold's hip while Thomas took hold of the small slippery hooves. He waited for the mare's next strain before pulling, slow and steady, guiding the foal's head and shoulders through. Clara watched from the opening, hands pressed to her chest. The foal's shoulders passed, and with one final surge, Marigold delivered her baby onto the clean straw. Thomas caught her, easing her to the ground, and immediately tore the membrane from her muzzle. The tiny chestnut filly coughed, drew in her first breath, and released a thin, high whinny that cut through the rain. Clara's face lit with awe. She's beautiful. Marigold raised her head, nostrils flaring as she nuzzled the foal, licking the damp coat with steady determination. Alan stepped back, pulling off the gloves. That's a good start. His gaze met Thomas's. You've got something worth guarding. Don't let anyone take it. Thomas nodded, the words settling inside him like a vow. He noted the time on Ruth's checklist, 11:43 p.m. Remember the 1-2-3 rule, Ruth reminded them. Standing in an hour, nursing in 2, placenta passed in 3. Dip the navel in iodine now. Thomas did as instructed, then covered the foal with a dry towel and spread fresh straw beneath her. Outside, the wind began to shift, the hardest edge of the storm moving east, leaving the steady drip of water from the eaves. Clara, now inside the stall with her father's permission, knelt beside Marigold's neck. The mare lowered her head until it nearly touched the girl's shoulder. The foal nosed toward her mother's belly, searching for milk, the 3 of them framed in the warm light of the headlamp, safe for the moment from the wild night beyond the barn. Morning broke over Red Creek in a wash of pale gold, the storm's fury replaced by the calm clarity of a sky freshly scrubbed clean. The air was cool and sharp with the scent of wet earth, and in the Whitfield barn the scent mingled with the warm, sweet musk of fresh straw and the unmistakable aura of new life. In the center stall, Marigold, the chestnut Mustang mare, stood with her ears angled forward, her body forming a gentle crescent around the foal who pressed close to her side. The filly's coat was a deep red-brown, its sheen made brighter by the stray shafts of light spilling through the loft boards. Down her forehead ran a blaze as white and precise as a brushstroke, tapering into a flame-like point just above her pink muzzle. Her legs seemed impossibly long and spindly, yet there was a grace in the way she tested them, one uncertain step at a time. Clara leaned on the stall gate, the top rail cool beneath her hands, her eyes bright with the kind of joy that erases fatigue. She had stayed in the barn most of the night, and in those quiet hours she had whispered the name she'd kept to herself until this moment. Liberty, she said softly now, tasting the syllables as though they were a promise. Marigold flicked an ear, and the foal turned toward the sound, taking a wobbly step in Clara's direction. By mid-morning, word had spread through town. Neighbors began arriving in small groups, drawn by equal parts curiosity and affection. The barn door was propped open to the light, and visitors stopped along the wide center aisle to catch their first glimpse. No one entered the stall. Mrs. June Callahan, small and sprightly in her cornflower blue cardigan and floral print dress, had set up a small table near the entrance with a pump bottle of hand sanitizer and a shallow tray for rinsing boots. She greeted each guest with a smile and a reminder to speak softly so as not to startle Marigold or her newborn. Sheriff Pierce arrived first, hat in hand, the deep lines in his weathered face softened by an unguarded grin. He stepped up beside Clara, resting one hand on the top rail. "Heard I've got a new citizen to welcome," he said quietly. Mrs. Callahan followed close behind, carrying a small bale of fresh hay under one arm and a jar of molasses cookies balanced carefully in the other. "For the humans," she said with a wink as she passed the jar to Clara, who blushed and murmured thanks. In the corner, Thomas stood back, watching the easy exchanges, the smiles, the way Liberty's curious gaze followed each voice. For the first time in weeks, he felt the tightness in his chest loosen. The trouble they'd been living under seemed, for one fragile morning, to hold its distance. At dawn, Dr. Ruth Sanders had stopped by to check on mother and foal. Her practiced hands moved gently over Marigold's flank and down each leg before turning to Liberty. "Placenta passed clean," she confirmed. "Navel's been treated, and I'll run a quick IgG test to be sure she's gotten what she needs from the colostrum." Clara listened intently, nodding at Ruth's reminder to keep a small notebook handy for recording feeding times, temperature, and any changes in behavior. Later, as the last of the visitors drifted away and the barn fell quiet again, Liberty took a few bold, clumsy steps in the straw, her tiny hooves making soft thuds. Clara laughed aloud, the sound bright against the rafters. Thomas let himself smile at the sight before stepping outside to fetch the mail from the rusted box at the end of the drive. The envelope was there, thick and cream-colored, the name of a Santa Fe law firm embossed in dark blue across the corner. Inside, on heavy paper, was a formal notice, a claim for rep levine, the legal term for the recovery of property, accompanied by a motion for a temporary order. Harlan Tate's attorney alleged irregularities in the consignment record from the livestock auction, using the argument to demand the immediate return of Marigold and her foal or compensation equal to their true value. The court had not yet granted the order, but a hearing date had been set. Thomas folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into its envelope. He didn't want Clara to see it just yet, not when Liberty was still finding her legs under the safe canopy of her mother's side. But when he stepped back into the barn, Mrs. Callahan caught the tight set of his jaw. "Bad news?" she asked in a low voice. "Harlan's making it official," Thomas said, hired himself a lawyer, and filed the paperwork. Mrs. Callahan's eyes narrowed, but her voice stayed steady. "Then we'll just have to make more noise than he can ignore. You're not in this alone, Thomas." 2 days later, under her direction, the fellowship hall at Red Creek Baptist Church was transformed. Hand-painted signs appeared at the grocery store and on the notice board by the feed mill. Benefit social for the Whitfield family, help keep Liberty home. On the night of the fundraiser, the parking lot was full long before the 7 o'clock start. Inside, long folding tables sagged under the weight of pies, casseroles, and fresh bread. A fiddler in a worn leather vest played near the corner, his bow coaxing reels and jigs into the air. Clara, wearing a pale yellow dress Mrs. Callahan had lent her, moved shyly between groups of townsfolk, answering questions about Liberty with a mix of pride and awe. Thomas stationed himself near the coffee urn, shaking hands, meeting eyes, thanking people he hadn't spoken to in months. Sheriff Pierce made a slow loop around the room, chatting with familiar faces before stopping beside Thomas. "This fight's for the lawyers," he said quietly, "but I'll step up night patrols out your way. Get yourself a couple of motion lights up by the barn. Any unfamiliar plates hanging around, you call me direct." When Mrs. Callahan tapped a spoon against her glass, the room hushed. "Friends," she began, her voice warm and steady, "we all know the Whitfields are facing a fight they didn't ask for. We're here tonight because we believe Liberty belongs where she was born, with the family that saved her mother and gave her the gift of freedom. Every dollar you put in that jar goes to legal fees and care for these horses, and every prayer you send will give them strength to stand their ground." Applause broke out, filling the hall with the thrum of hands and boots. Clara looked up at her father, and for the first time since the letter arrived, Thomas let himself believe they might actually win. By the end of the evening, the donation jar was full. Mrs. Callahan and 2 other women counted the money in plain view of the remaining guests, signed a receipt, and promised to deposit it into a dedicated fund at the local bank the next morning. The walk home was quiet, the night air cool and fragrant with the faint scent of damp cedar. Thomas's steps felt lighter. The battle ahead was still real, but so was the community standing with them. In the barn, Liberty lay curled against Marigold's side, her small body rising and falling with the rhythm of deep sleep. Clara knelt beside her, one hand resting on the filly's warm neck. "No one's going to take you away," she whispered. From the doorway, Thomas made the same silent promise. The morning of the hearing broke crisp and bright over the sandstone ridges surrounding Mesa Vista, the air sharp with the lingering coolness of early spring. Thomas eased the pickup into a space along the curb outside the Mesa Vista County Courthouse, the hood ticking as it cooled, and sat for a moment gripping the steering wheel. Beside him, Clara smoothed the skirt of her pale blue dress, her hair pulled back into a neat braid. In the back seat, Mrs. June Callahan sat upright, her gloved hands folded in her lap, lips pressed into a thin but determined smile. Sheriff Pierce's cruiser was parked down the block, its polished hood catching the sun. Inside, the courthouse carried the smell of old paper and polished wood, a place where voices carried but did not echo. Judge Marianne Whitford, a woman in her early 60s with steel-gray hair and a reputation for patient but no-nonsense rulings, presided from the bench. Her gaze was steady, the kind that could read the weight behind a word before it was spoken. At the plaintiff's table sat Harlan Tate, his heavy frame filling the chair, a suit coat stretched tight across his shoulders. His attorney, Clayton Royce, a man in his 50s with a taste for expensive ties and careful gestures, shuffled his papers with deliberate calm. At the defense table, Thomas sat straight-backed, Ellen Morrow, the Whitfield's sandy-haired attorney, leaning toward him for a quiet word. Clara sat between them, small and still, the tips of her shoes barely reaching the floor. The proceedings began with Royce's opening, a smooth recitation of auction paperwork, irregularities, and the claim that Marigold's sale was void. His tone was measured, but it was the language of transactions, stripped of the heat and dust of the auction ring. Ellen's rebuttal came measured but firm, anchored in the bill of sale, the absence of credible evidence of wrongdoing, and sworn statements from the auctioneer and clerk confirming every step of the sale was by the book. When Ellen called Clara to the stand, the room shifted. The judge looked down over her glasses. "Do you understand what it means to tell the truth?" she asked. Clara nodded. "It means saying what really happened, even if it's hard, because lying hurts people and makes the court not believe you." Judge Whitford nodded once. "Good. You may proceed." Clara's voice began softly. "She was alone in the ring," she said. "She was thin and scared, and everyone said she was trouble because she was going to have a baby. I thought, if nobody wanted her, she'd go somewhere bad. I couldn't let that happen." She told of stepping into the ring, the way Marigold lifted her head when their eyes met, and how everything else seemed to fall away in that moment. By the time she finished, her cheeks were flushed and her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The courtroom was silent. Sheriff Pierce took the stand next, recounting Harlan's visit to the Whitfield farm, the offer to buy Marigold back, and the words that left no doubt he meant to take her by any means. He noted there had been horse thefts in the area, but confined himself to stating the facts without accusation. Mrs. Callahan followed, her tone warm but unwavering as she described the Whitfields' care for Marigold and the birth of Liberty. Other neighbors spoke briefly, each testimony painting the same picture. Marigold had been unwanted until Clara stepped forward, and the Whitfields had done nothing but care for her since. In closing, Ellen's voice was steady. "This is not a dispute over an object," she said. "It's about responsibility, who stepped up when it mattered, and who turned away." Judge Whitford recessed, then returned to deliver the verdict with deliberate clarity. The sale was valid, conducted under as-is auction terms. No irregularities had been proven, the Replevin claim was denied, and the temporary order refused. Ownership of Marigold and Liberty would remain with the Whitfields. Clara exhaled only when she felt her father's hand close over hers. Outside, the midday sun washed the courthouse steps in gold. Sheriff Pierce clapped Thomas on the shoulder. "Justice served," he said simply. Mrs. Callahan gave Clara a quick hug, murmuring, "Your mother would be proud." In the days that followed, the fundraiser money paid the legal fees and covered feed and veterinary costs. Then came the call Thomas hadn't dared hope for, a steady job with the regional agricultural co-op overseeing feed distribution. The position was close to home, with hours that would let him keep the farm running, and his first paycheck allowed him to clear a portion of the ranch's overdue bills. 2 springs later, the grass in the north pasture rippled under a soft wind. Liberty, now a sleek 2-year-old with the same chestnut coat and white blaze that had inspired her name, stood saddled for the first time. Months of groundwork and light training had prepared her for this moment. Clara adjusted the stirrup leather, swung up smoothly, and settled into the saddle with the easy balance of long practice. Marigold grazed nearby, head lifting as Liberty stepped forward. They moved out across the field, Liberty's stride lengthening, Clara leaning into the rhythm, her laughter carrying on the breeze. Marigold followed at a steady pace, the 3 of them framed against the wide blue sky. In that open expanse, with the wind in her hair and the sound of hooves drumming the earth, Clara felt the truth of what they had all fought for freedom, and the love that had made it possible. Sometimes the greatest miracles are not sudden flashes of light from the heavens, but quiet moments when love, courage, and faith come together to change a life. Clara's story reminds us that God often works through the smallest hands and the most tender hearts, guiding us to protect, to nurture, and to stand firm for what is right. In our everyday lives, we can be that light for someone else, whether it is a neighbor in need, an animal in danger, or a friend who has lost hope. If this story has touched your heart, share it with others, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel so we can keep telling stories of hope. May the Lord bless you and your family with the same strength and grace that carried the Whitfields through their trials. If you believe in the power of love and the miracles God can bring, write Amen in the comments.